Hello, welcome to the presentation of my capstone project. This project is focused on reproductive justice and reproductive care. My name is Samantha Ellsworth, and I became interested in this topic as I researched programs that were anti-racist, anti-poverty, and very targeted towards populations that had been marginalized and were in need. And researching reproductive justice during the end of the Trump administration became fascinating because it toward the end of that administration's time, it was so volatile and this issue was so divisive. So as I conducted my research, I noticed two overarching umbrellas under which the research fell. And the first was a political umbrella and the second was a need umbrella. And under that political umbrella, I found that in 1970 in America, a really good thing happened with the passage of the Health Services Act. This had the express intent of addressing inequities to contraception and created something called Title X funds, which funds reproductive care clinics all over the nation. Sadly, within a decade, Title X funds had been weaponized and were being used as a political tool and kind of along party lines with very anti-abortion candidates rescinding or affecting funding and Democratic presidents restoring it. And it's kind of a game of Title X funding hot potato. Unfortunately, during the Trump administration, the funding cuts and legislation and the administration's executive orders cut funding and made adherence so strict and abortion prevention so rigid that Washington state completely withdrew from Title X funding, choosing to try and find ways to fund their own clinics in the state. This has had, of course, universally disproportionately negative outcomes for marginalized populations. Underneath that need umbrella of my research, I found several studies that corroborated that systemic racism perpetuates poverty, that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in America are uninsured at vastly higher rates than their white counterparts, that BIPOC are often dependent on subsidized care clinics, specifically reproductive clinics. And some cool studies I found that were really hopeful and good were that when no cost or low cost contraception is provided, abortion rates decline and overall community health increases. And specifically with long acting reversible contraception or Lark, we see improved outcomes over an even longer time period for these marginalized populations. So part of my research was conducting interviews. I talked to clients of reproductive care clinics and providers, and everybody is universally frustrated. There were three main areas of frustration. Frustration with cost and funding. Health shouldn't be a political issue, but it has become, and the funding is where we see negative health outcomes. The second was uniformity, reliability. I had one client that I interviewed who 5 years ago had no problem getting a free intrauterine device, that's a Lark method, at a local clinic. And with restrictions and funding, she came 5 years later to get the same procedure, same device, same clinic, and it would be $800. She is a person of color, she's underinsured, and this was just impossible. There was no access to care at this point. In speaking with providers, there was a real frustration that they can't offer uniformity. They don't have answers, they don't have funding. The final point that I gleaned from my interviews was that the need has become exponential. It's exploded with COVID. Clinics that often served as the only point of contact for this population with any kind of healthcare were now reduced staff, reduced hours, and not allowing walk-ins. So exponential need there. So as I thought about this, my thought process, a need emerged, and the need was low-income individuals need increased reproductive autonomy. And I wanted to create a small-scale intervention that would meet this need. And that was somewhat politically immune, and that had a goal to support people in planning their futures on their own terms and timeline. I employed two theories to create this program. The first was Feminist Theory, which examines how gender systems work and if gender arrangements are fair. And the second was Ecological Theory, which looks at the affected population in their environment, in their context, address what barriers do they face. So when I examine this population and the population most negatively affected by Title X cuts or cessation, it was BIPOC living at or near poverty level and uninsured or underinsured and seeking care at subsidized clinics. And then another really specific and interesting category emerged that was this population relies on public transit. And when you add public transit to the mix of obtaining contraception, you have a real problem, because then you getting to appointments can mean long and costly travel, childcare, time off work, and having to refill a prescription every month or every few months just wasn't possible. So the intervention is called Lark Pass. It is for those individuals eligible for free or low-cost transit. Advertising for the program will be in transit centers, stops, and clinics. And the advertisements will display the Lark Pass phone line. If an individual is interested, they call. They're set up with an appointment at the clinic nearest them. And at that appointment, they can choose their preferred method of Lark, an implant lasting 3 years, up to some IUDs that are 10 years. Reproductive care clinics and staff are already in place and trained to deliver Lark. And funding streams would include Washington State, fingers crossed, the Department of Health, and Title X funds may be being restored under the new administration, and private donors. I have two main objectives with this program. The first is that people get Lark, that they obtain long-acting reversible contraception. So the indicator for this would be appointments being made. We'd find those in clinic calendars, case records, and supply logs. And the second objective is increased Lark education about effectiveness in care. And we would assess this with staff interviews, telling us perceived information levels and clients. We would assess this with surveys, either with the client right there in the clinic, post-implantation, or over phone or text. Ultimately, with this program, we are hoping that this population can be empowered to choose the course of their family, to choose the timing, and to get the very best care available for years to come. Thank you so much for listening to my program. I appreciate your time.